Many of Ireland's resources are already well known, while the search goes on for others. Our natural features and climate are being employed more and more in resource development. One area where they can be used to good effect is forestry.
The greatest good for the greatest number for the longest period is a principle of good forest development. We're going to look at this principle on 3 levels: the physical facts, the socio-political scenario, and the economic opportunity.
Long, long ago, 2/3 of the land on this planet was covered in trees. Today, despite wholesale deforestation through the ages, the world's forests still cover 1/3 of the Earth's land area. These forests are unevenly distributed, and the percentage of forest land in different countries varies considerably. Ireland's forest cover is only 7%.
This is one of the lowest forest areas in the EC, which has an average of 24% cover. So is it safe to presume that Ireland is simply not physically suited for forest development? Is our climate inhospitable? Are our soils poor? Is there a basic biological reason for Ireland's low forest area?
The natural vegetation of Ireland is forest. When man first arrived about 7,000 years ago, this country was almost completely covered by trees. Its depletion to a forest cover of only 0.5% by the early part of this century was due to the growth of bogs and, more importantly, overexploitation by man. As in most other European countries, Ireland's forests were initially used to provide fuel and building materials, and cleared to make way for agriculture and expanding human development. But the most significant factor in Ireland's remarkable deforestation was the Tudor plantations. The planters were more than willing to clear fell large areas of forest, the wood of which was increasingly used for ships, buildings, implements of all kinds, and charcoal. By the early 1700s, Ireland had become a timber importing country. Yet the physical conditions for the growth of trees are still in place, making Ireland one of the most viable countries in Europe for extensive forest development. Our climate and soil are particularly suitable.
When you think about it, Ireland is a country of few extremes. We have no earthquakes, no tornadoes or volcanoes, no killer bees or poisonous snakes. This mildness also extends to our climate.
The Irish climate is chiefly influenced by our island status and the Atlantic Ocean. With mild, moist winters and cool summers, we have a typical West Maritime climate, cool and temperate, modified by the Gulf Stream flowing from the warm regions of the Caribbean. If the rain in Spain falls mainly on the plain, then the rain in Ireland falls mainly on the west, where the moisture-laden air from the Atlantic rises over the mountain ranges along the western coastline. Rainfall in this region can be as high as 2,000 millimeters in the mountains, twice the average for Western Europe. Heavy rainfall and high humidity provide ideal conditions for the growth of trees, especially conifers. The growth rate of conifers in Ireland is over 4 times that of Scandinavia. When you consider that this region has a long tradition of conifer forest and a very healthy secondary industrial base, the potential for Ireland is obvious. Another and perhaps more important factor in the viability of forestry is soil type. Irish soils can generally be divided into 4 types: peats, glaze, podzols, and brown earths. Peats are generally wet, organic soils which are mainly found in the West and the Midlands. Glaze are poorly drained mineral soils, often associated with carboniferous rock. They occur extensively throughout the country. Podzols are commonly found in upland areas. Brown podzols are deep, free-draining soils and can be found in the southeast. Brown earths are deep and well-drained. Good structural and textural properties make this soil ideal for agriculture and forestry.
In fact, all these soils, with the exception of some podzols, are quite suited to the growth of trees. Why then, if our climate and soils are so ideal for forest cultivation, do we not have a more developed forest industry? Why don't we at least have forest cover equal to that of the EC average?
Although state forestry was initiated at the turn of the century, it wasn't until the establishment of Saoirse Éireann, the Irish Free State, that any real effort was made to plant forests on a large scale. In 1922, the State Forest Service began a modest forest expansion. At this time, the land area under forest was at the unprecedented low of 0.5%. Initial planting was more than offset by continuing clearance, but the 1930s saw the area under forest begin to expand slowly. Planting continued through the 40s, but real progress, although yet quite limited, did not come about until the 60s and 70s.
Most of these forests were planted in upland areas, like Slieve Bloom and the Highlands here in County Wicklow. Much of the lowland areas, in particular those of the west of Ireland, were not afforested. The west has little forest cover, even though physical conditions have always been favourable. The reason then for this lack of forest development must lie elsewhere. For a resource to develop, certain conditions have to be in place. We've already established the physical parameters, but social and political forces are just as important, if not more so. It's very much a case of balance. A resource will only be developed when the forces for change are greater than those against.
A number of factors are now working for forestry. Market demand for wood, the increasing importance of forestry in rural development and agricultural reforms, international concerns about tropical deforestation and the role of forests in climate change and biodiversity. These factors are all accommodated in the approach which the EC has adopted towards forestry, both within the community and further afield. Ireland has been a major beneficiary of the practical support which the community gives to the development of the industry. A significant event in the management of forestry as a resource in this country was the establishment in 1988 of Cuilche Teoranta, Ireland's state forestry company. Given a commercial mandate by government, its job is to manage and develop state-owned forests to obtain the maximum possible return. Of equal significance to the development of the industry in Ireland, now and in years to come, has been the rapid growth in forestry involving farmers and other private landowners. The growth of this sector is expected to continue. Overall responsibility for all aspects of forestry in Ireland, whether undertaken by Cuilche Teoranta or others, rests with the Department of Agriculture, Food and Forestry.
Hello, Forest Service.
The Forest Service, which is part of this department, is responsible for the administration of the most important development for Irish forestry in recent times, the Forestry Operational Programme.
This programme, running from 1989 to 1993, aims to boost the Irish economy by investing through forestry in land, industry and people. One of its main objectives is to stimulate rural development and to contribute to the reform of the agricultural sector.
You'll go far to find an Irish person unable to trace a rural ancestor. Agriculture was and is the main source of employment in rural Ireland. How long this will remain the case is questionable. Employment in agriculture has fallen by almost 50% over the last 20 years. In 1971, there were 216,000 people working in the farming sector. 20 years later, this figure has fallen to 113,000. This at a time when the workforce expanded by 76,000. This restructuring in agriculture is compounded by recent cap reforms. It's now more important than ever that rural communities use every available means to achieve greater economic and social development. Concepts and structures within agriculture are changing, and a broader, more imaginative approach to resource management and economic development in rural areas is the way ahead. This is not simply a local or regional issue, it's a national imperative.
One such opportunity for development is forestry. Broad political conditions are right for its development as a resource. But what about the social factors? Is forestry an acceptable land use? What are the social implications of extensive afforestation? In what ways are people and the community affected by large-scale forest development?
To find out, we're going to take a close look at two contrasting parts of the country, Aughrim in County Wicklow and Kilkelly in East Mayo. the Aughrim region is perhaps one of our best models of modern resource management. Emigration and migration have long been the fate of many Irish people, especially the rural community. The population trend of much of rural Ireland is in decline. Very few employment alternatives have been available, and for many the only option was and is the boat, the plane or the big city. Aughrim is a notable exception. The population of the Aughrim region in 1926 was 2,176. There was a 20% decline by 1961, but as the trees planted from the 20s matured, industry developed and the population returned to its 1926 level.
Forestry has played a major part in the rural development of Aughrim and surrounding areas because of the infrastructure of the whole industry. In the 20s and 30s, there was a major employment created by the old Forestry Board. It went from there to harvesting of the early crops, from there to setting up of nurseries for replanting of the crops that were being clear felled, and then the sawmills developed, and they're major users of timber and major users of labour. The whole thing is part of the pulse of the area, really.
Moving westward from Aughrim to Kilkelly, an area bordering East Mayo and North Roscommon, we find a community heavily dependent on agriculture, with only 4.4% under forest. The Kilkelly region has been unable to support its population, and a constant outflow of people has seen the population drop to only 38% of what it was in 1926. Kilkelly, like many other rural areas, is indeed a community in decline.
But if you go out the road here now and you see one house closed up and another house, only one living in it, and so on, and that has been the trend. They've gone here, they've gone to America, or they've gone to England. But a lot of them would have stayed, and a lot of them that are gone would come back if there was employment for them. The trouble is, of course, what do they do if they stay? I mean, the farms are too small. There's maybe enough for one person, but if there's a whole family in it, there's not enough in it. And naturally, then it makes a difference to all this town and to every other town. In my shop here, I'm going to have less customers if there's less people living in the area, so it hits everybody.
Attitudes to forestry in the Kilkelly region are mixed. A recent report found that although over half of the population are in favour of development, almost 1/3 are against it. One of the main reasons for negative reaction is the long-term nature of forestry.
Forestry is a new science to farmers. They know the farming business well, but they don't know forestry. Of course, it's the last option most farmers think of, really, because it's such a long-term nature. You don't see an income in the short term. I think the direction farming is taking today in the west of Ireland is sadly a downward direction, I would say. Farm holdings traditionally have been small here. Therefore, it does lead to problems when it comes to afforestation, because, as you know, the minimum area to get a grant is actually 2 hectares or 5 acres. Now, that's an area that we as a co-op actually can help to solve, because we can encourage farmers to group together and thereby block up areas adjoining one another to actually have enough land to get a grant.
Moving back to the Aughrim region, which has 22% afforestation, almost 1/3 of the workforce are dependent on agriculture. So what's their experience with forestry? How does it differ with Kilkelly? And how has it affected their livelihood?
I think it certainly can live side by side with farming, especially in County Wicklow, where you have a lot of marginal land. And pieces of land like that would never be very productive for, you know, even for dairying or for beef or anything.
Particularly in an open area, a forest is a great shelter belt, like, you know, and shelters for any kind of stock, it's as important nearly as feed. And the forest, like, a forest does break the wind.
I never was that lover of trees, like I suppose to be certain people would be a lover of trees, but I wouldn't be a lover of trees now. So originally, when I was growing up, a young fella, I'd say, well, like, I'd much prefer to see a field of cattle than a big plantation of trees. But now, like, I think, like, you know, you would see loads of timber going in there and plenty of work being, you know, generated from them up in Wicklow Woods there and that. So that's the reason why I'd be more see it from a different point of view now than I did maybe back a few years ago.
A recent survey has shown that almost 90% of the population in the Aughrim area are in favour of forestry. Not surprising when you consider that over 1/5 of the workforce are directly involved in the timber industry. On a social level, forestry has helped stem the outward flow of people that is all too common in other rural areas such as Kilkelly.
Of course, modern forest management affects many other areas of society, not just a rural community. And even though forestry is first and foremost an economic activity, consideration must be given to its effects on related areas.
The environment is one such area. If forestry is developed on a large scale, the landscape will be altered. The Aughrim experience and the experience of similar forested areas highlights a number of problems, one of which is the clear felling of large areas at the same time, which can often result in a scarring of the landscape. Another problem has been the planting of conifers in straight lines, which have been criticised for their visual severity. There have also been concerns about the impact of forestry on wildlife, fisheries, archaeological sites and areas of scientific interest. Yet all these problems are surmountable, and indeed policymakers today are introducing a number of measures to give forestry a greener touch, that is, to make it more environmentally friendly. Almost all forestry projects undertaken in Ireland today are supported by substantial grant assistance. No grant is paid to any project likely to damage the environment. Where grant assistance is given, the project must comply fully with the environmental guidelines issued by the department. Large planting projects require planning permission, which involves the preparation of environmental impact statements. One of the greatest environmental criticisms levelled at concentrated forest development has been the continuous extensive planting of conifers.
An Taisce is committed to seeing forestry increase in Ireland, but we think that forestry is not going in the right direction at the moment. We're going towards a Sitka spruce factory, which is very unhealthy. I think that there is too much of a distinction made between economics and environmental matters, because if you do environmentally the right thing, in the long term it's also economically the right thing. If we continue to allow the short-sighted economic agenda to dominate our policy development on forestry, then we're going on the wrong track.
One reason for the low levels of broadleaf plantation is the extraordinary economic viability of Sitka spruce, a conifer species. Sitka is ideally suited to our climate and soil and produces some of the highest yields in Europe. Its value in economic terms cannot be refuted. It accounts for over half of our forest cover. Broadleaves, however, although not as commercially attractive, are widely regarded as being more aesthetically pleasing. They do, of course, lend themselves particularly well to certain kinds of wood use. While the financial incentives in the form of government grants for the planting of broadleaves are significantly higher than those given for coniferous plantations, and while the government target for the broadleaf share of all new planting has been raised to 20%, conifers offer the best option for those seeking the earliest and highest return on investment.
According to our dictionary, a resource is a source of economic wealth. The question we have to ask is this: is good resource management about maximising this economic wealth, or is it about compromise and striking the right balance between competing interests? So far, we've looked at the physical, political social and environmental factors that affect or are affected by forest development. On an economic level, however, the greatest good forestry has to offer is its associated activities, chiefly the value-added processing industries. Opportunities for added value are opportunities for more jobs and greater wealth creation within Ireland.
The forest industry needs to be developed in order to utilise the increasing volumes of timber that are becoming available from Irish forests. There are 13,000 people currently employed in the industry, and there is great potential for increasing this figure in the future. The Aughrim experience provides us with a valuable insight into the economic future of forestry at national level. Imagine Aughrim as Ireland, 22% of its land under forest. The economic benefits of such a high level of afforestation are on several levels. On a primary level, the provision of jobs in silviculture. On a secondary level, employment in timber processing and transportation. On a tertiary level, the spin-off effect to other services. In Aughrim, the forest resource is exploited to its optimum level through value-added manufacturing. Woodfab Limited employ 147 people in its Aughrim sawmilling operation. The value added to the raw material used to manufacture this end product is considerable. It's estimated that £1 worth of tree can become £5.50 from a sawmill, £19 from a particle board mill, and £27 from a paper mill.
So if the ultimate exploitation of the forestry resource is in secondary industries, let's look at the viability factors which would determine the success of such an enterprise.
The location of a secondary industry would be determined by a number of factors: the proximity and availability of raw materials, the suitability of the site, the standard of communication and transport links, the availability of the right people, and the market demand for the product.
Now, were we to apply these location factors to a region such as Kilkelly today, it would fail on two counts: a lack of raw materials and a low standard of transport links. What though if 25% of the area were afforested?
The further development of forestry can offer many opportunities for economic and social development in the years ahead, and the west of Ireland can expect to share in the benefits. It suffers from no permanent handicap insofar as the potential opportunities for forestry are concerned, and indeed is to the fore in relation to certain associated activities. For example, the Letterfrack Furniture College in the west of Connemara. The reduction in agricultural land would of course affect agriculture, but it wouldn't mean the disappearance of scenes like this. Not all land needs to be given over to an alternative use. Agriculture will continue to be the main land use, but the creation of new jobs in forest-related activities such as timber processing could more than compensate for the loss of jobs in farming. So to reap the economic benefits of forest development as a renewable resource requires more than just planting trees. Afforestation will form the basis of the secondary processing industries, but careful attention must be given to species selection and to structural development such as communication and transport links to accommodate haulage to and from processing plants. The spin-off effect of forestry also carries through to tertiary industries such as tourism through recreation, amenity and urban woodlands. It should be remembered, though, that even these woodlands can be managed for an economic return.
The way in which forestry in modern Ireland is being approached is far broader than would have been the case in the past. It spans everything from recreation, amenity, benefits to urban dwellers, right across through tourism and into farming. There is certainly an economic return for anybody engaged in forestry who establishes and manages a forestry project properly, irrespective of whether they're involved in conventional commercial forestry or whether along the line they've become involved in recreation, in amenity forestry or in tourism. We believe that forestry, if properly undertaken and properly managed, can support and aid the development in the years ahead of secondary and tertiary industries, definitely. And we believe that that is something which can apply right throughout Ireland in various regions of the country.
Throughout this programme, we've looked at many of the factors that influence or are influenced by forest development.
We've found that the physical conditions for the cultivation of trees are ideal in this country. Our favourable climate and soils places Ireland in a unique position with regard to forest development. We've looked at the political, social and environmental influences on the forest resource. These are the factors that ultimately decide the direction of future development. We've also looked at what forestry has to offer on an economic level. Apart from direct employment in the forest, there are growing opportunities for value-added industrial development and spin-offs in tourism.
The forest is a great natural resource, a renewable, sustainable resource with tremendous potential to create wealth. As a resource, its development and management must try to accommodate all interest groups, from foresters to farmers to environmentalists. It must try to find a balance that reflects the greatest good for the greatest number for the longest period.